The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. My name is Francis Donald, and I'd like to welcome you to this second episode in an ongoing series of webinars on the Secret Doctrine, written by Helena Petrovna Blavatsky as an amanuensis for the many masters that worked through her. This and all the subsequent webinars, hang on here, we get a little problem. There we go. This and all subsequent sessions will be available on makara.us under the subtitle Open Webinars. You see it at the bottom left there, which will open the page on your right where you get a list of these open webinars. And I've circled where the Secret Doctrine webinars. So just click on that and you can download the webinar. Once more with some housekeeping stuff. There's basically two buttons that you need to concern yourself with. The mic button, where you will either mute yourself or unmute yourself. And it'd be great if you keep yourself muted unless you're planning to speak. But then don't forget to unmute yourself. And then, more importantly, the raising your hand button, which is the illustration that says B there, the little hand. I know most of you know this, but there's maybe a few new to the process. Click it once and your digital hand is raised. Click it again and it's lowered. Don't worry about lowering it. And I hope you click it often to raise your hand, because that's what these webinars are about. In the lower left on this page, you'll see the chat box, and with the little circle around type message here. So feel free at any time to enter questions and comments or copy paste quotes in this text box, which you can also use if for some reason you have problems with your audio. Okay, any further questions? Just text BL and she'll be happy to help you with that. So let's get to it. Oh yeah, one last plug for headsets. Your webinar experience will be much better for you and for everyone else if you have a headset. Without one, speaking sometimes sets up a disruptive echo, and you can get a good headset on Amazon.com for between 10 and 20 bucks. Just make sure it's a computer headset with a mic and not a stereo headset. Okay, let's get to it. During the first 20 minutes or so of each of these webinars, we'll continue to explore HPB's life and character using primarily, at least for the time being, Henry Olcott's old diary leaves. But before we begin, I need to make a correction. In the last webinar, I presented the small image on the upper left as a representation of HPB in 1873. This is not HPB. During this period, she looked more like the photo at the bottom of the page. Okay. We left our intrepid couple in New York, where they were becoming increasingly popular for their erudition on philosophical subjects, in part due to the publication of Isis Unveiled, and for HPB's penchant for psychic demonstration. This growth in recognition lasted through most of 1878, at which time Olcott and HPB took a steamer, almost certainly at the request of their masters, to Bombay with a stop in London, from which comes this story. Occult is narrating. And could we get a reader for this? Oh, by the way, as I mentioned last time, I'll often ask you to read quotes from the Secret Doctrine, which we'll usually refer to as the SD. It'd be great if everyone would participate in these readings. However, if your environment or your computer connection is noisy, or for any other reason you'd rather not read, please let us know via the text box. Otherwise, you will be occasionally called on to read a quote. No need, by the way, to cite the source, the book and the page numbers at the end of each of these quotes. So let's start with a reader for this story that happens in London to HPB.
Michael, can you please go ahead?
Yes, I will. The most striking incident of our stay in London was the meeting of a master by three of us as we were walking down Cannon Street. There was a fog that morning so dense that one could hardly see across the street, and London appeared at its worst. The two who were with me saw him first, as I was next to the curb, and just then my eyes were otherwise occupied. But when they uttered an exclamation, I turned my head quickly and met the glance of the master as he looked back at me over his shoulder. I did not recognize him for an acquaintance, but I recognized the face as that of an exalted one, for the type once seen can never be mistaken. As there is one glory of the sun and another glory of the moon, so there is one brightness of the average good man or woman's face, and another, a transcendent one, of the face of an adept. Through the clay lamp of the body, as the learned Maimonides calls it, the inner light of the awakened spirit shines effulgently.
Thanks, Michael. So, while staying with the Billings in London, by the way, I was lucky enough to pick up a copy of Isis Unveiled inscribed to H.B. Billing by Blavatsky. You can see it there in the upper right. Anyway, while staying with the Billings, HPB described to her hosts how she is often literally not whom she seems to be. So could we get a reader for this section?
Alex, can you please go ahead?
Yep. The next evening after dinner, HPB explained to ourselves and two visitors the duality of her personality and the law which it illustrated. She admitted without qualification that it was a fact that she was one person at one moment and another the next. She gave us an astounding bit of proof in support of her assertion. As we sat chatting in the gloaming, she, silent near the window, with her two hands resting on her knees, she presently called us and looked down at her hands. One of them was as white, as sculpturesque as usual, but the other was the longer hand of a man, covered with the brown skin of the Hindu. And on looking wonderingly into her face, we saw that her hair and eyebrows had also changed color, and from fair brown had become jetty black. Say it was a hypnotic maya, yet what a fine one it was, produced without the utterance of a word by way of suggestion. It may have been a maya, for I recollect that the next morning her hair was still darker than naturally, and her eyebrows quite black. She noticed this herself on looking into the mirror in the drawing-room, and remarking to me that she had forgotten to remove all traces of the change. She turned away, passed her hands over her face and hair 2 or 3 times, and facing me again, she was natural self once more.
Thank you, Alex. That was a great reading. So after a long, uncomfortable steamer trip to India, Occult and HPB set up house in a small bungalow near Bombay, where, we're told, the streets of Bombay charmed us with their strikingly oriental character. The tall apartment houses in stucco, the novel dresses of the motley Asiatic population, the quaint vehicles, the overpowering influence of the whole picture on our artistic perceptions. Cocoa palms nodded their fronds over our roof, and Indian sweet-scented flowers rejoiced our sense of smell. After the dismal sea voyage, it seemed like paradise. So immediately upon arrival, HPB was asked to demonstrate her psychic abilities. Their reputation had really preceded this pair. So Olcott is narrating, and could we get a reader for this?
Asha, can you please read for us?
Yes. Mr. Ross Scott called on the evening of our first day ashore and provoked HBB into doing a phenomenon that was quite new to me. They were sitting together on a sofa, and I was standing with Harichand at the center table, but Scott reproached HPB for her evident intention of letting him go north to his official post without giving him the least proof of the existence of the psychic powers in men of which she had so much spoken. She liked him very much and so consented to comply with his request. "What shall I do for you?" she asked. She snatched the handkerchief she was holding in her hand and pointed to her name, Heliona, embroidered across one corner, said, "Well, make that name disappear and another to take its place." "What name do you want?" she rejoined. Looking towards us, where we stood at a distance of a few paces, he pointed to our host and said, "Let it be Harichand's." We came over to them on hearing this and saw what was done. She had Scott hold tight in his hand the embroidered corner of her handkerchief, retaining the opposite corner herself. After a minute or so, she told him to look. He did so and found that the substitution of names had been made.
Thank you. So that was Asha, right?
Yes.
Thanks, Asha. So word of this Western couple that championed esoteric Hinduism and Buddhism spread like wildfire. And soon HPB and Olcott were in such demand that they began speaking in ever larger public halls. Could we get a reader for this section?
Yes, can you please do it, Scott?
Sure. I gave my first public lecture in India at Framji Gawaji Hall. For novelty and picturesqueness, the scene was the culmination of delight. The contrast between this sea of multicolored turbans, snowy muslin, dresses, and keen onyx eyes looked out of handsome brown faces. The black costume, pale-faced, bare-headed audiences of the West, with no touch of bright colors save in the women's bonnets, was most striking. The crowd was so dense as to pack the hall, balconies and stairways, until not one more man could have been crowded in. Yet as quiet, orderly, and as attentive as though each person had had ample room. We sat on the platform, which was thronged by the leading personages of the different native communities of Bombay, and my discourse was listened to with breathless attention, interrupted from time to time by applause. It was really a historical event. For the first time in the West, and the recollection of the oldest inhabitant, a Western man should hold the majesty and sufficiency of Eastern scriptures.
Yes, thank you, Scott. Okay, well, we'll continue to follow HPB's adventures in India and onward in the next and following webinars. But for now, let's pick up where we left off towards the end of the Secret Doctrine's introductory, and then we'll move into the poem. We left off with a discussion of the withdrawal of esoteric source material from all the world's religions, presumably by the hierarchy, and the sequestering of that material in huge underground libraries hidden from the general public. So we'll pick up the introduction with HPB's description of why this withdrawal of source material was necessary. Could we get a reader for this paragraph, please?
Terry, can you read that for us, please? Nope, I'm not getting anything there. Let's go to Victor, how about you? Can you read that for us?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Victor.
The Secret Doctrine was the universally diffused religion of the ancient and prehistoric world. Proofs of its diffusion, authentic records of its history, a complete chain of documents showing its character and presence in every land, together with the teaching of all its great adepts, exist to this day in the secret crypts of libraries belonging to the occult fraternity. It is not the fault of the initiates that these documents are now lost to the profane, nor was their policy dictated by selfishness or any desire to monopolize the life-giving sacred lore. There were portions of the secret science that for incalculable ages had to remain concealed from the profane gaze. But this was because to impart to the unprepared multitude secrets of such tremendous importance was equivalent to giving a child a lighted candle in a powder magazine.
So why? Why is it true that portions of the secret science had to be concealed from the profane gaze? We get an answer in this paragraph. Can we get a reader, please?
Yes. Nicholas, can you read that for us, please? Nope, I don't hear him. Okay, let's try. Sharon, can you read that for us, please?
Doctrines such as a planetary chain or the seven races at once give a clue to the sevenfold nature of man, for each principle is correlated to a plane, a planet, and a race, and the human principles are, on every plane, correlated to sevenfold occult forces, those of the higher planes being of tremendous power. So that any septenary division at once gives a clue to tremendous occult powers, the abuse of which would cause incalculable evil to humanity. A clue, which is perhaps no clue to the present generation, especially the Westerns, protected as they are by their very blindness and ignorant materialistic disbelief in the occult, but a clue which would, nevertheless, have been very real in the early centuries of the Christian era, to people fully convinced of the reality of occultism and entering a cycle of degradation, which made them rife for abuse of occult powers and sorcery of the worst description.
Thank you, Sharon. So, HPB concludes her introductory with this great defense of the ancient wisdom teachings. Could we get a reader for this paragraph?
Anne, can you read that for us, please?
I try. The days of Constantine were the last turning point in history, the period of the supreme struggle that ended in the Western would throttling the old religions in favor of the new one, built on their bodies. From thence the vista into the far distant past, beyond the deluge and the Garden of Eden, began to be forcibly and relentlessly closed by every fair and unfair means against the indiscreet gaze of posterity. Every issue was blocked up, every record that hands could be laid upon destroyed. Yet there remains enough, even among such mutilated records, to warrant us in saying that there is in them every possible evidence of the actual existence of a parent doctrine. Fragments have survived geological and political cataclysm to tell the story. And every survival shows evidence that no secret wisdom was once the one fontaine head, the ever-flowing perennial source at which were fed all its streamlets. The later religions of all nations, from the first down to the last. This period, beginning with Buddha and Pythagoras at the one end and the Neoplatonists and Gnostics at the other, as the only focus left in history, wherein converge for the last time the bright rays of light streaming from the eons of time gone by, unobscured by the hands of bigotry and fanaticism.
Fanaticism. Thank you so much for reading.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm not opening these comments for discussion. We could easily do so and have a very fruitful discussion, but I'm waiting until we actually move into the proem before I open the floor. And so we come to the very last quote from the introductory. It's actually her final words in the introduction. So could we get a reader for this short paragraph, please?
Okay, Terry, can you do that now? We can't hear you.
Hey, Terry, are you self-muted? Sometimes.
Yeah, no, I don't see it in.
Oh, you don't see it, huh?
Now he is. Now you're
Okay.
self-muted, Terry.
Oh, he's trying to get on. Well, we'll try you again, Terry. Let's choose someone else.
Okay. Tia, can you read for us, please? Oh, nope. Sorry. Vera, can you read for us, please?
Yes, to the public in general and the readers of the Secret Doctrine, I may repeat what I have stated all along, and which I now close in the words of Montaigne. Gentlemen, I have here made only a nosegay of culled flowers, and have brought nothing of my own but the string that ties them. Pull the string to pieces and cut it up in shreds, if you will. As for the nosegay of facts, you will never be able to make away with these. You can only ignore them and no more.
It gives some sense of the hostile environment in which this material came out. So, thus ends the introductory. Let's review a few key statements that was made during the preface and the introductory before we moved into the proem. Let's see, I'll read the first, and then if we could get a reader for the second, that'd be great. It is needless to explain that this book is not the Secret Doctrine in its entirety, but a select number of fragments of the fundamental tenets. Okay, can we get somebody to read the next one?
Helen, can you read that, please? We're getting some very bad feedback. No, I'm sorry. Holly, can you? Okay.
Go ahead.
Gary, can you please?
That works, that's tolerable. Go ahead.
We can't hear you.
Gary, can you speak up?
Hi, sorry, am I loud and clear?
Yes, you are. Hey, go ahead and read the last three quotes.
Okay, the Secret Doctrine was the universally diffused religion of the ancient and prehistoric world. Proofs of its diffusion, authentic records of its history, a complete chain of documents showing its character and presence in every land, together with the teaching of all its greater depths, exist today in the secret crypts of libraries belonging to the occult fraternity. The documents were concealed, it is true, but the knowledge itself and its actual existence had never been made a secret of by the hierophant of the temple, wherein mysteries have ever been made a discipline and stimulus to virtue. The now secret wisdom was once the one fountainhead, the ever-flowing perennial source at which were fed all its streamlets, the latter religions of all nations, from the first down to the last.
Thank you very much, Gary. That's great reading. Okay, and this brings us to the beginning of the Proem, page 1 of the Secret Doctrine. From this point onward, we'll be looking at each and every paragraph of the SD, including the footnotes. This might be as good a time as any to insert a disclaimer. I am not a Secret Doctrine scholar, but rather a student of the material just as you are. I've read the SD a couple of times and at one point memorized the stanzas of Zahn, but I am no expert, like David Regal, who is with us today, for instance, who has written a book on the historical origins of the stanzas of Zahn's. So, you know, anytime you just can't stand it anymore, David, and you want to take over, just feel free to jump in. So I certainly won't have and won't pretend to have all the answers to your questions, but I encourage you to ask nonetheless. And, you know, maybe through discussion, we'll together gain some insight. So especially from here on out, my hope is that we approach this amazing material as a group, with as many in the group as possible, contributing to a better understanding of the material under discussion. You know, if you have a question you think, oh, you know, that's a really dumb question, I bet you 20 other people have the same question. So feel free to put it forth. And like I said, even if I can't answer it, we'll discuss it and maybe get some insight. I ask only, and this simply to keep some order, that you raise your digital hand and then wait to be called on before speaking. Certainly we have had no problem with that thus far. And that you keep your comments relevant to the discussion at hand. So with that said, let's get started. There's actually 4 introductions to the Secret Doctrine. Excuse me just a moment, I have to, technical difficulties, I think is what they said. There's the preface, in which HPB introduces the material. The introductory, which we just read through selected paragraphs from it, which explains the intended purpose of the book, and a later added historical introduction. The 4th introduction is the Proem, which historically serves a specific purpose. In classical literature, proems set the tone of epic narrative by invoking the muses or offering a prelude to a hymn. The term proem comes from the Greek word prooimos, pro meaning before, and oimos, a path or way. So we could say that the Proem of the Secret Doctrine invokes the muses, or speaking occultly, stimulates the intuition before we embark on the path which will be revealed to us by the stanzas of Zahn. Stephen Levi, in his book on the Secret Doctrine, let's see, get back here, states, well, actually, let's get a reader for this.
Karen, can you read for us, please?
Sure. The Proem reminds the student that the Secret Doctrine is also a book of poetry, a devotional book that has the same effect as poetry to arouse the intuition and imagination in the reader or hearer. Introducing each of the volumes of the Secret Doctrine, as well as the thesis of each section are stanzas from the Book of Zan. A stanza is a section of a poem containing a number of verses. The verse or sloka means song and comes from the Sanskrit root shru, meaning hear. Even in the English translation, the stanzas are clearly characterized by the symbolism, rhythm, and lyrical qualities of the poetry. The proem invokes the muses. Hesiod refers to the muses as the daughters of Zeus and Mnemosyne, who preside over and inspire the arts and sciences, especially poetry and philosophy. The mother of the muses, Mnemosyne, is the goddess of memory. The proem speaks to and invokes the memory of the soul, reminiscence of intuition, which will inspire the sincere reader in the study and comprehension of the Secret Doctrine.
Thank you so much. So, let us begin. In honor of our long-standing brotherhood, I would like to ask Scott Thayer to begin the reading of the poem.
Thank you. Proem, pages from a prehistoric period. An archaic manuscript, a collection of palm leaves made impermeable to water, fire, and air by some specific unknown process, is before the writer's eye. On the first page is an immaculate white disc within a dull black ground.
Thank you, Scott. So, in this presentation of the first image, 3 pieces of information are given. First, an image representing the most fundamental of all dualities, the featureless white disk on a black background. 2, an introduction to the concept of symbols or ideograms, which we will later discover constitute the ancient language of Sinzar, which HPB calls the secret sacerdotal tongue. And 3, a description of the medium, the quote, impermeable palm leaves on which these images appear. Scott, would you continue, please?
On the following page, the same disc, but with a central point.
So, in the second image, we have a further duality represented, and a second Sinzar symbol presented, the point within a circle. A quick note about Sinzar. HPB says, there was a time when Sinzar was known to the initiates of every nation, when the forefathers of the Toltec understood it as easily as the inhabitants of the lost Atlantis, who inherited it, in their turn, from the sages of the third race, the Manushis, who learned it direct from the devas of the second and first races. And such is the mysterious power of occult symbolism that the facts which have actually occupied countless generations of initiated seers and prophets to marshal, to set down and explain in the bewildering series of evolutionary progress, are all recorded on a few pages of geometrical signs and glyphs. So as to the medium on which these symbols are presented, the quote, collection of palm leaves made impermeable to water, fire, and air by some specific unknown process. You know, we have to ask, did they ever exist on the concrete physical plane at all? Well, whether they ever physically existed, most certainly HPB was viewing them etherically, as she did most of the reference material she consulted for her writings. For Occult tells us that they had only a very small physical library, literally a couple of shelves of books. And while writing her great works, he describes seeing her looking into space as though reading and then jotting down what she has seen. But let's get on to the more important questions, the meaning of the symbols. HPV tells us the first the student knows to represent cosmos in eternity, before the reawakening of still slumbering energy, the emanation of the word in later systems. So what can we make of this? This one sentence. We've had the description now of these two symbols. And here's our first piece of information, right? It represents cosmos in eternity, before the reawakening of still slumbering energy, the emanation of the word in later system. Oh, by the way, do you see that definition up on the upper right? Anytime that there's some doubt as to the meaning of the words, I include them in a list on the, it's either the right side or above the text, or both. And that doesn't come from the SD itself. It comes from a number of different sources. It's always set off by a little text box there. So any thoughts about this first image? She's already told us that it represents cosmos and eternity. So any other thoughts about this? I know this is probably the biggest ask of all, because this is the most archetypal and the highest level of any of the ideograms that we would be presented with. So, any ideas? Anyone? Anyone want to care to jump in?
Please go ahead, Cheryl.
A question more than a statement.
Sure.
The phrase "before the reawakening of still slumbering energy," the word reawakening.
Right. Okay, that's a good question, and it points to a whole huge teaching, which is that these precipitations are just one of in a long series. So the process, as we'll discover on subsequent pages, the process is one of manifestation and then a withdrawing, and that's seen as the days and nights of Brahma, or the out-breath and the in-breath. And so what's being described here is that initiating of what she describes as the emanation of the word, right? Which is one method that still slumbering energy actually comes forth. Does that answer your question? This is one in a succession, actually an infinite succession, so we're told, of these manifesting periods. Okay, yeah, you're quite welcome. Anyone else want to venture a thought or a question about this sentence?
Please go ahead, Michael.
Hi, yeah, I saw, I felt like it was like an egg, and then when the center point is put in the center, it's like it's impregnated the egg.
Mm. Yeah, that is actually one of the common metaphors, that egg is sometimes shown wrapped with a serpent, and it's the Hiranyagarbha is this egg, and the serpent has its mouth open and is fecundating that point at the center, which is, to carry the metaphor would be, the yolk, or the point of the germ that will then manifest as that coming cosmos. So yes, that is an oft used metaphor. Thank you. So,
And the other Michael? There you go.
Thank you. One way to look at this may be the black field is eternity. and cosmos comes into being within the white circle, which reminds me of the story in Genesis of there was darkness and God said, "Let there be light."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's yeah, that you could look at it that way. The way HPB describes this duality is that the black represents that which is forever beyond the knowing of humanity. So there's absolutely no speculation possible. It's beyond even conceptual knowing or conception, whereas the white disk is at least a conception, and that it represents what you're describing is the night, even though it's a white disk, it's the night of Brahma, because it does not yet have the point. So it represents this pralaya, or period of eternal rest. Thank you, Michael. Appreciate that.
And we have another question from Gary.
Yeah, Gary.
Hi. Just in the first section of the statement at the bottom, the student knows to represent cosmos in eternity. I would ask,
who is that student?
Yes, I would ask, who is cosmos? What is cosmos? Is cosmos the all? Is it the purpose? What is cosmos?
Well, it's the, you could see the definition that is given in actually.
Yes.
That's in Blavatsky's glossary of definitions of words and concepts that appear in the Secret Doctrine. The idea, though, with this K instead of the C, is that it's a causal level of cosmos, which is most represented by the circle with a point in the center. Because what we're looking at here is a stage before that, which is cosmos in eternity, right? Before the reawakening of the still slumbering energy, which is that point at the center, which represents that the seed or the yolk before the manifestation. Yeah. So it's a kind of archaic or causal cosmos, K osmos giving birth to C osmos, so to speak.
Yeah. It seems to me that it's making a statement, a requirement of the student, that the student would have achieved a level of maturity or understanding on how they perhaps should conduct themselves before following on in the teachings.
Yeah, it does. It suggests that, doesn't it? This could be, and who knows what that level is? Possibly an initiate. A certain level of initiation before you can truly even speak of this with any awareness. Okay, I have a couple of thoughts on this. The first disc represents the unknowable state of being that precedes differentiation on any level. The life aspect in its most causal state. Nothing can be said about this state of being because language conditions that which it references, and that which is represented by this symbol stands beyond all conditioning. Or as HPB says, a moment's thought shows that such a state can only be symbolized. To describe it is impossible. Nonetheless, the consideration of these symbols establishes a vibration that stimulates the intuition, making a discussion of these symbols a kind of divine folly, where angels fear to tread, right? So, that's why we invite comments on this. By the way, if you have a particular interest in the philosophy of the first aspect of divinity, of beingness, of the causal realms represented by this feature disk. There's a whole Yahoo study group called Identity as Being at yahoogroups.com, which was begun by Michael Robbins, that focuses on causal levels of reality. Here are some sample descriptions of the state of being put forth by Michael. The absolute is absolutely ultimate and unchangeably substantial to all apparent variety, infinitely greater than the supranoumenal absolute deity which arises from it. That would be, by the way, the point at the center of the circle, right? The absolute cannot be experienced in universe, yet it is essentially everything that can be experienced. So quite provocative. And there's many of these comments that are, great seed meditation thoughts. So if you're interested, check out, I'll go back up here, Identity as Being at yahoogroups.com. I would add, from a sacred geometry perspective, that the circle symbolizes the highest of all abstractions, which we call the unknowable one reality. Its perfectly uniform, continuous curving in on itself can be seen to symbolize the great breath, which HPB will shortly introduce. Why? Because this curving in on itself suggests eternal perpetual motion and ever becoming, as well as the ever existing. This motion is a reality unto itself, standing in a causal relationship to the mover or that which is moved, the one cause of the forces of nature. The cycle also signifies absolute space as opposed to physical space, the unmanifested universal divine mind, which is the one absolute beingness beyond any state of consciousness knowable by the human mind. Okay, these are just thoughts. I would go back to HPB's germane statement, which is to describe it is impossible. And so best to hold it and let it stimulate your intuition. Okay, now let's continue with the text. Yeah.
We had, her hand went down. We had a question from, went back up. Please go ahead,
That's
Ashley.
fine.
Actually, I did have a question, but when you said to hold it and just be with it, because
Oh, come on, let's hear your question.
it is a paradox. Back to Michael's quote about the absolute cannot be experienced in the universe.
Sure, I'll bring it up.
Essentially everything that's something, the absolute is anything you do not experience. If you see it on like a vertical, hierarchical kind of way, and yet it's saying it is essentially everything. But I see there's really no point in asking, because you just have to be with it, and something will never drop down somehow.
Well, that's good insight on your part, that, you really do have to be with it. But we can talk about it, or at least around it.
Yeah, if you can talk about it, that would be good. That was what I was going to ask you, if you could talk about it. It might help me just sort of percolate something somehow.
Yeah, sure. Well, the one life can be seen as both God transcendent, and the term God here is used in a very different way than it's normally used. You could say the one life transcendent and the one life immanent. And immanent means that it absolutely permeates everything that is. So if you want to have an experience of the one life, it's not only beyond all that is, it's also within and animates all that is. Now, getting to that source is, in its fundamental primary source causal condition, is not possible, and still be other than, and still be apart from that source. You can only know that source when you are one with it. Withdrawal has a phrase he calls the day be with us, which is when we return to this source, we experience, you know, the word experience is not even correct. We experience the concept or the idea of the day be with us, which is total unity. But you can see that especially English, you know, it might have a little more luck with Sanskrit and a lot more luck with Sinzar, but you know, all our language is so conditioned by concepts that we can never get to this level of reality. But we do stimulate the intuition in our efforts, you know, to try to do so. So, thanks for your question. Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, so now let's continue with the text, which takes a look at the second figure, the point within the circle. Let's first read through the definitions, and this is going to be a kind of method that we use all throughout these webinars. We'll look at the definitions first, so you know that when we actually read the texts, hopefully they'll be a little more informed. And these definitions are, by the way, will always be set off by a text box, as I mentioned before, above or to the right of the text of the Secret Doctrine itself. These definitions are often of words that will appear again and again through the SD. I'll only define them, however, a couple of times in the first couple of appearances. So, you know, try to register them so that you catch a sense of their meaning. Okay, so could we get a reader for this wonderful paragraph? It really gets into the meat of it.
Leah, can you read for us, please?
Certainly. The definitions or text, Francis?
Start with the definitions, always.
Okay. Pralaya, a period of obscuration or repose, planetary, cosmic, or universal, the opposite of Manvantara. Mundane egg, of this earthly world rather than a heavenly or spiritual one. Spiritual here being a relative term. Cosmos, the universe as distinguished from our world globe or earth. Manvantara, a period of manifestation as opposed to pralaya, rest or dissolution, applied to various cycles.
Okay, so with that understanding, and you could jump up there, you know, as Leah continues to read the paragraph to get a stronger sense as during the recitation here. Go ahead, Leah.
The point in the hitherto immaculate disk, space and eternity in pralaya denotes the dawn of differentiation. It is the point in the mundane egg, the germ within the latter which will become the universe, the all, the boundless periodical cosmos. This germ being latent and active periodically and by turns. The one circle is divine unity from which all proceeds, whither all returns. Its circumference, a forcibly limited symbol in view of the limitation of the human mind, indicates the abstract, ever incognizable presence and its plane, the universal soul, although the two are one. Only the face of the disk, being white, and the ground all around black, shows clearly that its plane is the only knowledge, dim and hazy, though it still is, that is attainable by man. It is on this plane that the manvantaric manifestations begin, for it is in this soul that slumbers during the pralaya the divine thought, wherein lies concealed the plan of every future cosmogony and theogony. Theogony.
Yeah, I think it's cosmogony and theogony.
Right.
Pretty sure that's right. Anyway, okay. This is there's a lot here, a lot of thoughts, and so let's first of all take it as the paragraph as a whole. Any impressions or insights? Love the insights. If you have anything sparks an insight, please come forward. At all, any questions or insights, thoughts about this this amazing teaching? She describes both the featureless disc, just the white disc, and the disc with the point at the center at this time, kind of going from one to the other, right? So, any thoughts? I know it can be a bit overwhelming to look at this as a whole, but feel free to jump in. Let's go to the top and look at these concept by concept. Okay, the point in the hitherto immaculate disc, space and eternity in pralaya. Okay, so what is meant by space and eternity in pralaya? She's referring back to the immaculate disc, right? This space, and in other words, time and space, are not yet manifest as we normally think of them. They are in this condition of obscuration, right? So then she goes on to describe the point, denotes the dawn of differentiation, okay? And then it is the point in the mundane egg. Of course, the mundane egg here is at a very, very high level. She's saying this is of an earthly state of manifestation, but rather than a heavenly or spiritual one, but that's only in relation to this highest state, which is the entirely unmanifest, the pralaic state. So, any thoughts about this initial statement? This germ, yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I don't see any hands yet or comments.
Okay, that's fine. We'll just keep moving, and when something occurs to you, you have a question, jump in.
We got questions now.
Okay.
Go ahead, please, Gary.
Yeah, it just, I think here it's the point within the circle is visible when someone is in pralaya, and it's the point that defines some eternal truth, perhaps purpose, and recognition of a divine truth.
Mm-hmm.
That's
that's a really important point, so to speak.
Yes.
Which is that it's not manifest yet, is it? Yeah. This is all potential at this point. By the way, you notice here that your idea of the egg and the germ in the egg is already being discussed, Gary. Yeah. You brought that up before. Yeah. So at this point, you're right. This is why it's described as the dawn of differentiation. It's not differentiation itself yet. It's really the potential for differentiation. So yes, you could say that it is, you know, it's the morning light between the night of Brahma and the day of Brahma that this represents, right? This is also called the first logos, and that's at the very highest cosmic sense. Nothing, no local, no solar systems being indicated by that. It's just potential at this point. Okay. So thank you, Gary. That helps bring it forward. Let's see. I'm going to pick up where we left off. The one circle. Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Asha has a question.
yes, Asha.
So we can ask any question.
Absolutely.
I hesitate, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Yeah, you'll get a medal for bravery later.
The boundless periodical cosmos. So the universe is periodical, but the point in the mundane egg, so is the human, undifferentiated, unindividuated human not periodical and therefore existed or exists before and the universe as we know?
The point, since the point represents the potential of the manifested universe, it also occurs in an infinite series. What is the one life is the figure with just the white disc, right? Which everything returns to, including the seed, right? Including the potential of manifestation. That returns to the unmanifest, right? And then periodically the seed or the point at the center, and remember a point is one-dimensional, right? So it is just the purpose indicated, you could say. But nonetheless, that is psychically and is the initiating element of manifestation. You know, you could say the point itself belongs to the realm of manifestation, even though it's not as yet manifestation, you see?
But the point precedes the periodical.
That's right.
The point, yes. So that means
it precedes it and is the source of it. It's birthed from it.
So you and I, humanity, existed before the universe, God that we know. We were there before the universe was.
Yeah, this is, yes, this is even before the causal level of universe, that, you know, what she describes as cosmos, K-O-S-M-O-S, this even precedes that. In other words, even way beyond even any notion of physicality, just what we consider the very highest spiritual levels, this precedes that. This is the source point of all of that will be, even on causal levels, right?
So
does that make sense?
That's pretty magnificent and amazing.
Great. I'm so glad that you feel that way. Because I do. Yeah. That's great. Thank you for your question. It was actually an excellent question.
Okay. Francis? Yeah. Okay. Roz says, in astrology, the sun symbol in a birth chart is the circle within the central dot, representing the birth of the human, of manifestation.
Yeah, you know, as a universal symbol, it's any birth, isn't it? I mean, it's like the yolk in an egg. It can represent any birth in potential, at the state of potential. This is also, most famously, the symbol of our solar logos, right? But that's because from our vantage point, the solar logos is as high a state of consciousness that we could possibly imagine or conceive, or eventually come to have any awareness of at all. So you could say that anything beyond that would also be represented by this symbol. Anything higher than that, you could say that the logos, of the one about whom not be said might be represented by this symbol. Of a galaxy, of a universe of which there may be many, could all be represented by this when speaking in potential, right? Which is, it's the seed of that which will be coming forth. Yes, anyone else?
Yes, I got a couple of, several hands up, but also have a comment from Gary. He says, please provide example of a Manvantara manifestation.
We're in one, and that's really the only example that's available, because a Manvantara, well, okay, that's not strictly true. If you want to capitalize all the letters, the Manvantara and the pralaya are, as the definitions cite, are opposite poles. One suggests manifestation. So if you use Manvantara in all caps, it's what's happening right now. It is the universe in expression. But you can also use it, for instance, the cycle of a planet, right, could go into pralaya while other planets are still in their manvantaric periods, right? So you can use it more specifically to cycles. It doesn't tend to get used for small cycles, like years. Because of this concept of the pralaya, which is a complete period of rest and obscuration. And so it's only those phenomena that subscribe to this particular cyclic duality that can be described this way. Does that help? Hope so. Hey, Scott, you got your hand up there. It's great. Go ahead, B. I'll call on whoever's next.
Okay. Stephanie had a comment, another analogy: white circle, the solar male; dot, the female dark void from which emanations come, the divine female.
That's terrific. Your intuition is working well, because the very next symbol is the divine feminine. And yes, you can see that dot as the point of fecundation, right? Of germination, right? So, but you can also see it the other way around. See, at this point, it's somewhat sexless, or rather, you can see it either way, which is that the field is that fecund space which can be germinated by the phallic point, right? So either way can work. The next symbol, though, is absolutely feminine, and we'll get there in a moment. Go ahead.
Okay, Michael says, are these three aspects the same as Ein Sof and Ein Sof
Yes.
in the Kabbalah?
Yes, they are. Okay. They are. The Ein Sof is this stage of the highest causal level. You often see it standing above the tree of life, right? Kether being more akin to the symbol you see on your screen now, which is the highest level, right? But it's nonetheless a potential of manifestation. And that's a good place to describe also the sexual, which is that the highest, Kethor, and we'll get to a diagram of that in a moment, stands beyond the duality of sex. And then when you come down to the right, you have the male Sephiroth. And then to the left, Binah, you have the female Sephiroth, right? So you could see this as a triplicity of that which is beyond and unites the two and is potential for all life, and then the two separated sexual symbols. So yes, go on.
Okay, let's go to Scott. He's had his hand up for quite a while.
It's okay. Looking at the solar disk symbol here suggests like you're looking up in a dome and you see one point at the top. It's like you say, it represents the sun, and yet everything that's obscured or not perceivable beyond it. And it also suggests then, with all of the planetary symbols that we have that have developed or been given, that there's much to be learned about how the circle here and arc of the circle and cross and so forth, which we're coming to, how they interact and what they have to say about the planet involved and consciousness as it manifests at different levels, different planetary levels and so forth. And are you going to bring in, I assume you are, the Great Breath and Motion? Is that coming up soon?
It's coming up.
Okay.
Yeah, it's around the corner here.
Okay.
I love your analogy of looking up at a dome, and that point is it's really a point, folks. It's not a tiny disc. I did it that way so you could see it well, but it's a one-dimensional point, which suggests a dimensionality that is beyond the two-dimensionality of the disc, right? So you, as Scott suggests, you travel through that point to higher states of consciousness that exist beyond it. And thank you very much for your thoughts about the glyphs for the various planets. I think you're right that certainly Mercury and Venus, Earth, all just for starters, actually most of the planets except Pluto have some circle or arc or partial circle in the signs, and the ultimate meaning of that arc has to come back to the solar logos, of which they are centers in. And so you could say they're descriptors of particular qualities of energy within the solar logos. And of course, we know, since we know their ray types, that you can do a little cross-referencing there and determine a lot just by looking at the symbols in terms of the rays that they represent. One of the most obvious being Pluto with its upward pointing arrow representing the first ray, even though on a non-sacred level.
The point again too, in geometry, when you think about it, there, as Euclid set it out, there are certain what do you call them, propositions, I suppose, that you can't prove, that you can't actually do, you can't make. They become, fundamentally, you have to accept them as being, as a ground of being, but it has no full ground. For instance, a point, if it has one dimension, how do you represent that? Because any point you actually make has dimension.
It's actually, any point you make with a pencil has 3 dimensions, right? You can't get there from here. It's purely conceptual. Yeah.
It's that movement into ultimate being here. This that you just disconnect. You can't get there from here, but you have to accept it. But to actually draw it, can't do it.
You can't draw it.
Line is the same thing. It's what's this continuation of points, the points that you can't make, but they're here.
Yeah. Yeah, the only thing you could, most accurately say about it is that it denotes a particular place on, even though you couldn't see a true point because it would have no, it would have no width or height. It would nonetheless denote some particular loci or locale. In this case, the center, the very center of this disk. So it's really a good point. Now, don't everybody sign out. That I don't do a lot of puns during these webinars. So, anyone else?
Yes, we have several more hands and some more comments, but let's go to Michael. There you go, Michael.
Okay, I had two things, two analogies. The first is that it's the highest thought that precedes idea. And the second is, the point is the spark in the eye of God.
I like that. Spark, of course, being a point of fire, which, at this level, the first subplane of the physical flame is called a sea of fire. So, that type of fire, as opposed to the fifth level of the fire of mind, could represent, this level of consciousness, this kind of causal spark, and the eye of God, because you could also see the point as an eye. So I like that. That's great. Tell me your first point again about mind.
Oh, from the highest standpoint, thought, which precedes the idea.
Right. Okay. Yeah. It's, one of the descriptions of this plane is it's the plane of cosmic mind, right? Which is, again, nothing that we can go, oh yeah, the plane of cosmic mind. I get it now.
Yeah,
but,
right.
But the idea being that it is the ultimately knowable, which is why it's circumscribed, and white, because white represents, in this case, the knowable, right? And the black, that which is forever and ever beyond conception or knowledge of any sort. Yeah. So yeah, you could look at it as the plane of cosmic mind, but it's also much higher than that. If you're looking at this very highest iteration of this symbol, right? Because it's, the mind, even cosmic mind, is the fifth cosmic plane.
It's way beyond all that.
So we're looking at,
But we're looking at the 10th dimension.
At least, that's right, which is the one life, right?
Right.
So, yeah. Thank you, Michael. Any other thoughts? I'm so glad that
we have quite a few, but hold on just 1 second here. Terry, did you have a question or a thought? We can't hear you.
I think Terry is actually describing this in the most profound way you can describe it right now.
Okay, let's go on to Catherine. Did you have a comment?
I think we covered it in the last discussion. I was really struck by the circumference, the forcibly limited symbol.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we sort of...
What do you think forcibly limits it? It's the next phrase.
Right.
It's the limitation of the human mind.
Right. It's like I feel myself living on the circumference more than within the circle. I don't know, it's a very interesting, what it is. It's a strange limiting area that I know goes back and forth, right? I mean, the white circle could be bigger or smaller depending on the limitations of the human mind, which I don't think is a finite thing. So that adds a whole nother
that's right.
Place of dynamic something into the symbol.
Right. It's size is irrelevant. You know, it is all that is, and yet it's best described because of our limited human mind as a circle. You know?
Yeah.
And you know, one thing, it sounds like you're capable of this, is if you want to take this into meditation, is to meditate on the nature of the curve, of the constantly moving curve that continues to precisely move in upon itself in a way that never changes what it essentially is. You know, so it represents both motion and changelessness, which are aspects of this state of consciousness that we're trying to see. It's beyond consciousness, this state of being that we're looking at here. Because, for instance, if you had a spiral, right? Well, you would have direction. You'd be going in or coming out of the spiral. It would have an end, you know, the end of the spiral line, all of which is conditioned, all of which describes a particular reality. Only the circle suggests that which stands beyond what any other symbol can describe. And it is, as as HPB says, it's nonetheless a forcibly limited symbol. There's no way to draw or come up with a symbol that is more apropos, you know.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, thank you.
You bet. Anyone else?
Yes. Let me see. Gary said, would it be fair to say pralaya is within and not of, but manvantara is with?
It's good. That's good. But it's even beyond within, because within is, if there's a within, there's a without. And this is absolute unity. So you might get away with saying it's withinness, you know, at its highest level. But it's absolute unity. So it's beyond those conditioned stages. Anyone else?
Yes. And Veronica says the point equals the first utterance of the word, which is the beginning of a vibration, and that is movement.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yes. This is a symbol of the logos, and the logos means the word. So it is very particular, you just described, which is the seed or the potential word. You know, DK describes that right at the beginning, right? It's still slumbering energy, which is not yet manifested as the word, right? But that is its ultimate potential. The sound, which is creative and directive going forward. Anybody else?
Yes, I have one more comment, but let's go back to Terry. Terry, can you please speak? We cannot hear you.
Okay, I want to move. So, and folks, I will be occasionally doing this, because we're still on page 1. And so we have a lot to cover, and it's great to stick with one subject like this, especially this subject, but there's more revealed about this in the coming paragraphs. So unless, VO, you have something you absolutely need to make happen here, I'd like to move on.
No, okay, let's go ahead and
Okay.
move on.
Okay, so this figure indicates the abstract, incognizable presence. This, adds another element, right? And it's plane, the universal soul, okay? So the circle represents the presence, and it's plane, the universal soul. See, because we actually have 3 elements. If you include the black area behind, you actually have, to the outside, you actually have 4 elements, right? The circle itself, the plane of the disc, the point in the center, right? So and this concept of a universal soul enters into the picture here. And HPB says later that it is from this universal soul that you get the periodical appearance, but that it's the universal soul that holds all those future universal manvantaric appearances within itself, okay? And then it goes on to say, but the 2 are one. That is, the presence and the universal soul are one. Let's see, and then I'm skipping ahead here. So it's the soul that slumbers during the pralaya, and that describes the soul as the divine thought. So because the soul is slumbering, it's an agent of manifestation, isn't it? That from which comes forth the manvantaric existence. So I want to go on now to the footnote that you see there at the bottom, and it's reproduced here in the next page here. It is on this plane that the manvantaric manifestation begins, right? For it is in this soul that slumbers during the pralaya, the divine thought, wherein lies concealed the plan of every future cosmogony and theogony. So could we get a reader for the footnote here?
Catherine, can you read that, please?
Yes. It is hardly necessary to remind the reader once more that the term divine thought, like that of universal mind, must not be regarded as even vaguely shadowing forth an intellectual process akin to that exhibited by man. The unconscious, according to von Hartmann, arrived at the vast creative, or rather evolutionary plan, quote, by a clairvoyant wisdom superior to all consciousness, quote, which in the Vedantic language would mean absolute wisdom. Only those who realize how far intuition soars above the tardy processes of ratio initiative, forming judgments by a process of logic, reason, thought, can form the faintest conception of that absolute wisdom which transcends the ideas of time and space. Mind, as we know it, is resolvable into states of consciousness of varying duration, intensity, complexity, etc., all in the ultimate resting on sensation, which is again Maya. Sensation, again, necessarily postulates limitation. The personal God of Orthodox theism perceives, thinks, and is affected by emotion. He repents and feels fierce anger. But the notion of such mental states clearly involves the unthinkable postulate of the externality of the exciting stimuli, to say nothing of the impossibility of ascribing changelessness to a being whose emotions fluctuate with events in the worlds he presides over. The conceptions of a personal God as changeless and infinite are thus unpsychological and, what is worse, unphilosophical.
Okay, so we get a little bit of HPB's hidden wit here. The idea that this raging personal God who takes affronts, and seems to be just like a personality grown large, is totally unpsychological, but what's worse, unphilosophical, right? Do you get the gist of this? She's basically contrasting the ancient wisdom teaching concept of the one life as deity, and this anthropomorphic type of understanding. Are there any questions about this footnote? Any thoughts, insights, questions? I'll settle for musings.
I don't see anything yet. I know Terry wanted to say something, but I think we've lost him because we couldn't hear him.
Yeah, okay. She brings up von Hartmann here, right? Who's pointing out that this idea of clairvoyant wisdom, which the Theosophists will describe as intuition, being superior to all consciousness. Remember, consciousness is the second principle, right? And so when you're looking at this, the first principle of beingness, the only thing that can give you any faint sense of that is the intuition, because the intuition is the language of unity. And even though that's a far removed unity compared to the level of this highest first logoic state, it is nonetheless the closest that we can come to having some sense. And then it goes on to say, I love this word, ratiocinative, right? Which is just basic logic and reason. And that it completely is beyond that, right? But I think we have established this, in our previous discussion. So unless someone has a comment, we can move on. Okay, on to the next paragraph here. Back.
Asha has a comment, and I'm not sure it's not relative to what we had before, but anyway, it says, I'm reminded of Shiva as being described as that, which is not.
Yes, absolutely. It's a first aspect being. Now, that would be akin to this symbol here, right? Because it's completely first aspect, God of destruction. It is has no truck, so to speak, with the form aspect at all. It is pure Godhead, and yet it is manifest, right? So this symbol would be apropos. And in my Sacred Geometry series, I actually explored the symbols used for Shiva, which is the circle with little flames all the way around it. You've seen it with him standing in the center, standing on a human body, and then sounding the drum with one hand. Remember that? And his hands and feet form this dance. And that dance that he's engaged in is the Manvantara. It's the period of manifestation, and that little drum is time, right? So it's he describes space with his body, and then he hits the drum. And so it's very much the maintainer. Well, no, it's not the maintainer. It's the initiator of the Manvantara. I see Scott has his hand up.
Yes, but let me just say, Anne Veronica has a comment or question. What is the plane the Manvantaric manifestation begins?
What is the plane the Manvantaric manifestation? I don't understand that question.
What plane does the Manvantaric manifestation begin on?
Oh, I see. Well, it would be, by theory, it would be on the cosmic Adi plane, which would be the highest plane of the cosmic planes. To give you an idea of how far that is, you have the cosmic mental plane is the source of the true identity of our solar logos, and you'd be looking at 4 planes beyond that. But who's to say that the cosmic plane isn't itself a subplane in a supercosmic plane? Because at this level, we're looking at the entirety of the manifesting principle. And so, in a way, that hasn't been charted, because there is no one on this planet, including DK, HPB, or any of the masters, who has been even to the level of the cosmic astral plane. So it's one of those speculative questions. But you could, speculate and extrapolate, given the idea that of as above, so below, that it would be on the Adi plane of the highest cosmic levels. Yes, anyone else?
Yes, please go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, I was going to say that, remembering that this symbol we're looking at here is like a snapshot. It's a frozen picture. And what the quote below points out is that it's one absolute attribute, which is itself, is eternal ceaseless motion. So it goes, this is a snapshot, a frozen picture. And it refers back to the quote you started with that you didn't mention, I don't think, about the definition of God, which is a circle whose circumference is nowhere and its center is everywhere. That's right. But frozen so we can see it as one point, one picture.
Yeah.
Ceaseless motion of this idea, this ideogram.
Yeah. Actually, that was the first slide in the presentation. It was the sort of way, the slide to ponder before we got going. And this is an old thought, that has come forth. Yeah, that's an excellent point. That this condition that we see here lasts, see, it's not a function of time. So would you say a snapshot, time hasn't even been introduced. It's that final state, or I should say the first state before the Manvantara actually begins, when time and space extend forth into manifestation. So you could say it's the beginning of time and the beginning of space, and that's what the dot represents. That is to say, the potential for both of those. But at this stage, that is, as you suggest, is completely conditioned by motion. So this is, you could say, the very beginning of the motion of manifestation. Right?
And it's eternally present now, everywhere.
Yeah. That's right. This is what this symbolizes, is ever present. Yeah. Why don't we read this paragraph so we can, get some more information from HPD, and then we can comment on this. Can we get a reader, please?
Here, let me do it. It is the one life, eternal, invisible, yet omnipresent, without beginning or end, yet periodical in its regular manifestations, between which periods reigns the dark mystery of non-being, unconscious yet absolute consciousness, unrealizable yet the one self-existing reality, truly a chaos to the sense, a cosmos to the reason. It is one absolute attribute, which is itself eternal, ceaseless motion. It's called in esoteric parlance the Great Breath, which is the perpetual motion of the universe in the sense of limitlessness, ever-present space. That which is motionless cannot be divine. But then there is nothing in fact and reality absolutely motionless within the universal soul.
Thanks, B.L. Yeah, I'm so glad you chose to read. It's great. So what does she mean by a chaos to the sense, a cosmos to the reason? Why is it a chaos to the sense? Anybody have any thoughts about that one? Why chaos? Any thoughts?
While they're thinking about that, nice, simple, easy thing to think about. Roz asked, can you explain a bit more regarding the statement, that which is most motionless cannot be divine?
Yeah, well, it comes back to the idea that the one attribute, the one absolute attribute, which is itself eternal, is motion, right? And so you could say there is, its very nature is of the essence of motion. And of course, we're not talking about movement from point A to point B here. This is a profoundly esoteric concept, what this motion is. I could say it this way. It's abstract motion. I mean, we already think of motion itself as abstract, but it's at a level of abstraction beyond that. Because think about it this way. Motion is only perceptible in terms of that which is moving, right, to us, right? But what about motion itself? Like, you have that which is moving, okay? And motion is occurring, but it's not dependent on that which is moving, is it? So suddenly remove that which is moving, and you could say that that which is moving was participating in motion, but that it's not itself motion, right? Motion is ever existing. It's eternal and ceaseless. So when you have no motion, since that is the one absolute attribute of the divine, you have nothing. It's actually what that describes doesn't exist, and it doesn't not exist either. Because motion is the one attribute of the eternal, ceaseless being, which is called the Great Breath. I don't feel that was all that great of an explanation, but at this point, it's the best I can do. If anybody has, better insight on that, you're welcome to speak up. It's, of course, a very difficult concept, because the very idea of motion is inherently invisible, without a mover or a moved, right? Sometimes one of the attributes of a logos is called the great mover, and is akin to this participation in this absolute attribute of eternal ceaseless motion. That's the best I can do right now. Something to think about. But one aspect of this motion is the great out-breath that defines manifestation, and the in-breath, which withdraws it back into a state of pralaya, or non-being. So that's another aspect of this motion. But that's not the entirety of what motion is about, because even while in the state of pralaya, there is this one attribute, which is motion. So, any other questions I can't answer?
Michael, Stacy, did you have a comment?
Yes, I wrote that maybe motion at that level is thrilling potential.
Yeah, thrilling is a word that suggests outward movement from potential, you know, so yeah, I would think, you know, thrilling potential would belong to the greater field of motion. You know, you could describe thrilling potential as having motion. Though I don't think you could say thrilling potential is all that motion is, because motion also exists in the one life in the state of pralaya, which precedes potential, because it precedes the symbol you have on your screen now, right? It's the featureless this.
Just an idea.
Yeah, it's very connected though. I think you definitely could describe thrilling potential as an aspect of motion. You know, that's okay. I like that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Scott, please go ahead.
Just to point out the false distinction that modern science makes between animate and inanimate matter.
Right.
No distinction. It's all animate.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah. Right. And interesting, because what does animate mean? You know, motion.
Yeah. And also thinking about this, the great breath, in-breath and out-breath, we're now essentially, in terms of sacred geometry and number system, we're at a level of 2, because we're making a distinction of 2, of right. In and out. So in that understanding of it, we moved away from being with one to being an observer to see that it goes in and out.
That's right. I actually am speaking to the next stage when I say that. And it's only a way of trying to understand the motion when it's part of the manifesting realm. But at the stage you see on your screen and the previous stage, this is not the out-breath yet, right? This is the potential of the out-breath. So that's a very good distinction. And by the way, thanks for bringing up the idea of animate and inanimate, because do you see the connection between life and motion there? If something is animate, it's considered to be living by science, right? And to be animated means to be in motion. So it's even inherent in our scientific language, this idea of life and animation. So, okay, you know, we've far from satisfactorily plumbed this one. Are there any other?
Yes, we've got a couple of comments, and then Karen has a question. But Asha says only K in universes change. That is motion. And I'm not sure what she means by K. Maybe you do. Let's ask her.
Constant, K, constant.
Ah.
The only constant in the universe is change, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Right.
And that's motion.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
I was reminded of that phrase.
Mm-hmm. And again, that's is another way of describing the in and out breath, right? Which is remember, it's a spiralic thing. Even though the processes are revisited, every manifestation is unique. So it's another turn of the spiral in this endless series of turns, right? With the in and out breath, right? But it's not a precise revisiting of the exact conditions, creating the exact same results. It's ever evolving, right? So therefore, it describes one aspect of motion when applied to manifestation. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, and then Anne Veronica says, Master DK says time and space are entities. And then she follows that up with everything is animate, but the frequency of the vibration is different.
Yeah, right. Which, so you could say the velocity and the nature of the motion vary, but that's in manifestation, right? The levels we're looking at now, and can you see how we just can't wait to go to the next stage, because it's basically impossible to bring our experience to bear or our understanding to bear on these causal levels, right? Yes, but two very good points. The nature of motion in manifestation becomes infinitely variable. And also, a very good point of space and time being entities. This is a profound statement, right? The concept of beingness as how do you say it? As a presence, right? You see, I didn't want to say as a God or as a great being, because all these are lower aspects. But space is a living presence, as is time, right? But both are controlled or determined by the level of beingness that is described by this symbol on the screen now. Okay. Anything else before we move on? And you're going to love it when we move on, because it gets into something we can more readily describe.
Okay, we do have one more hand and a couple more comments, but please go
Great.
ahead, Karen.
Yes, what came to mind for me during this discussion was just that there's a pause between the in-breath and the out-breath.
Yeah, that's right. And that's right, and that's what you call pralaya, right? It's neither in nor out. And then you have this very first initiating point of the out-breath, but it's not the out-breath itself. It's not even the first part of the out-breath. It's just the potential of the out-breath. Yeah, right? This will be poetically described in the stanzas themselves when we finally get there. And I think you'll be, with this prep work, I think it'll be truly moving experience to read these stanzas. Anyone else?
Roz had a comment very similar to what Karen just said, or Karen just answered what Roz asked. So as there is not behind the exhaling and inhaling of the universe a stillness. So
yeah,
same concept of that pause.
Pause, but not without motion. You know, first of all, we got to give up on the idea that we can comprehend this absolute attribute of eternal ceaseless motion, because that's not the movement that we normally think of as motion, which at its most primal level is the out-breath and the in-breath, right? It's something that stands in a causal relationship to that forever exists, even in the state of pralaya. It's, of course, just something we have to accept. I've found no way in my own thoughts of trying to distinguish it by anything, by a concept, that would particularize what that level of causal motion might be. So in some ways, we have to take this just as a teaching statement, right? That is really beyond what we can speculate on, right? Of course, HB warned us of that, that only the symbol actually works, that any attempt to describe it, for instance, the great motion is fruitless. You'll only get the symbol, and I think we're starting to realize and have an experience of what that is, right? Guess what, folks? We are fast running out of time here, but I want to just move it down one slide to the footnote related to this. See, here we had a footnote here in this thing somewhere. Where is it? Yeah, the great breath. You see in the third line from the bottom, it says, which is itself eternal, ceaseless motion, is called in esoteric parlance the great breath. So now we have this footnote, which I will read, just to save a little time. Plato proves himself an initiate when saying in Credulus that theos is, by the way, the light blue is always my addition, also if it's bracketed. So what I've done is gone and found these Greek and translated. Thank God for the internet. That theos is derived from the verb theo, to move, to run, as the first astronomers who observed the motion of the heavenly bodies called the planets, which is, in that term is the genitive singular of theos, the gods. Later, the word produced another term, aletheia, the breath of God. So, she's tracing the source here. The lambda, originally capitalized, is not a noun, but representative of a philosophical idea. The meaning of the word then changes from word or speech to law or order. Okay, so she's suggesting that not only is the word a sound that exists at the highest levels of, what that sensory perception connotes, but is also just the law of universal being, right? And that has to do with the order in which the universe manifests, right? Through the logos, which is through the word. So, and that, my friends, is all we have time for. We didn't make it to manifestation, but we will next time. But for now, we're going to have to draw this webinar to a close. So I thank you so very much for participating. I enjoyed it immensely, and I hope you did too. Hey, we made it all the way into page 2. So that's great. This is especially dense in the beginning, of course, especially philosophically. It will become less so as we move into the material. Not less thought-provoking, but less philosophically dense. So with that, I will say thank you, and I hope very much we'll see you next time. Now, the date for the next webinar won't be on the third Sunday of November, as I have to participate in a concert in my town here. And so I just absolutely can't do it. However, we're determining. Any headway on that, BL, as to when it might be?
No, let's see if Joe can talk to us. She's self-muted right now. No, we'll get back to him later.
Yeah, so just, you know, look for the invitations and the heads up for that next date. And
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
Well,
Jill.
I think we're good with the date you had proposed.
What date was that?
Oh, we'll send it out to everybody.
Thank you.
Okay. Can't give
Thanks,
you a date.
Francis and everyone. Great webinar.
So we can't give you the date now, but you know, just wait for our invitation. We'll get it out to you 10 days to 2 weeks before the webinar, and then just a couple of days before as a reminder. Okay, and see you next time. And thank you very much for attending. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.